California is about to vote on secession. Okay? Now, is this a republic vote? Right? Are these elected representatives that are going to vote on this? No, it's the people. It's democracy. Okay? At a state level, at a local level, it is supposed to be more democratic. Okay? The reason we're a democratic republic is because it is unfeasible, even way back in 1789 or whatever year you want to use, okay, to have 4.5 million people vote on every single idea.
I mean, say theoretically they do secede. Where are they getting all their water from? Because don't they get it mostly from other states?
No, they actually get a vast majority of their water from Lake Tahoe. The Sierra Nevadas, which fall into California, basically the way water works in California is you get snowfall in the Sierra Nevadas, and then as that melts come summertime, that runoff goes down the mountains and into reservoirs that are collected there, and it happens that way. Now, they will have a problem when it comes to power. Okay? There's a massive nuclear power plant, basically where Camp Pendleton is, that could handle a significant amount of energy, but a large part of California's energy comes from hydroelectric power from the Colorado River, which it does not. And in fact, when I was teaching in San Diego, they canceled school one day because it was Thursday night at about 6 o'clock, power went off in all of San Diego. Actually went off pretty much in all of Southern California. Okay, because of something that happened all the way out in Arizona at this hydroelectric power plant. Okay, and it took them until 2 a.m. to get the power back on. I mean, it was a long process, and so like school districts, basically after like 5 hours of no power, they went ahead and canceled school the next day.
How do people know that you canceled school?
Social media, your little smartphone still works.
Yeah, smartphones, right?
I said when I was teaching,
Oh.
not like when I was in high school. No, we didn't have smartphones when I was in high school. Okay? We didn't have cell phones when I was in high school. We had pagers.
How do you use that?
Okay. So we're going to continue our conversation on the presidency. All right, real quick, before we get into this, let's go over some of the things here. You know that on Wednesday you have a test, right? That's terrible. Okay, because obviously I assume that you have forgotten a significant amount of information over the course of spring break because you were busy doing other things. I will put a review sheet on Edmodo today. All right, so you will get a review for this test. All right, hopefully that will help a little bit. All right. Your legislation is due Friday. You're going to turn it in to turnitin.com. All right, I will have that class set up, in all honesty, probably tomorrow. All right, so you'll be able to, probably tomorrow after school. So you'll be able to submit Wednesday if you like, but I'll make sure that you have at least a couple of days in order to submit that early if you so desire. All right. Understand that there's 4 weeks left in this 6 weeks, right? You realize that? Yeah, there's 7 weeks in this 6 weeks. Okay? You have 4 weeks left. All right? When this 6 weeks ends, you basically have 2 weeks and then the AP test. Okay, that means we have a grand total of 6 weeks of class left. Okay, for those of you that are seniors, and once AP testing starts, you got 2 weeks of AP testing, you'll be back in my room for like a week, and you're pretty much done. Okay, then I'm going to sign some exemption forms, and y'all going to go on home for however long you decide to go home for, because you ain't got to come back in the fall. Alright? What that means is that if you are behind right now, alright, you need to do everything in your power to catch up. If your name was somehow on my list, because you've been out for whatever plethora of activities. I'm going to tell you right now, if you missed school on Friday, you missed a vocab quiz, right? much all off at this point, because
I still see my food.
are you caught up?
Yeah,
You 100% certain?
yes.
Okay. Take your word for it, I don't know. Alright, so you need to do everything in your power to make sure that you are caught up. Alright? I'm going to tell you right now, when the third 6 weeks hits, you're going to have 4 major grades in the first, 4 days. 6 weeks. It's a semester class. So as far as I'm concerned, we're in the second 6 weeks. It's your second 6 weeks in this room. And with the final 6 week grading period, you're going to get 4 major exams real quick.
What chapters was the vocab quiz that you guys took on Friday?
11, 12, and 13. Alright? And again, those are on Edmodo. Alright? What was I? Yeah, so you'll have 4 at pretty much the beginning of the final 6 weeks. That way we can knock all those grades out. My goal is basically have grading done by May 15th, roughly. Alright? So at that point, if you're failing or you need to beg and plead to get to an 80, you'll have an opportunity, and I might be nice depending on how hard I think you worked all year. Alright, so, presidency. Okay, what we're going to talk about today, a lot of it has to do with presidential power. Alright? So again, some of this will be historical, some of it will be sort of more current in terms of how presidential power actually functions. Alright? Understand that presidential power is not nearly as clearly defined as what a lot of congressional powers are defined in the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution uses the term executive power, which is very vague. And you've had presidents that have tried to use executive power really to sort of make all sorts of claims, right? Nixon tried to use executive power as a means of saying that he didn't have to tell people what he was doing with recording conversations in the White House. Bill Clinton tried to claim executive power so he didn't have to testify about cheating on his wife, right? All kinds of things, right? Basically, when you look at sort of historically how we define that term, executive power tends to be broadened in what we would consider what we call a time of crisis, right? And I think we had this conversation near the end of the week before spring break when we talked about sort of that Roman tradition, that Roman ideology, right? We know that Rome was a republic. When war happened, what did Rome do? Well, they suspended the republic, right? And they just appointed one man to basically be in charge of everything and just handle business at that point in time. And now that didn't work out real well for the Romans because they appointed a Caesar at one point, and after the war was over, he didn't get power back. But in times of emergency or what we consider crises, the presidency has expanded power over the course of history, right? Whether it was the Great Depression and FDR, which we've talked about numerous times, or any sort of period of war, right? So the Civil War, for instance, Abraham Lincoln suspends habeas corpus, and the courts allow for that. Okay? In normal times, right, or not periods of non-crisis, and the president is subject to dealing with the regular sort of checks and balances that we have in place. All right. Again, kind of comical. We do sort of expect the president to be the predominant force, be the one to get things done. We blame the president when things don't get done. Yet, I mean, if you look at the current debate right now, right? President Trump, one of the things that he ran on is he said that he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare, right? And he got Congress to write some legislation to repeal and replace Obamacare, and it's gonna fail. Right? Is that Trump's fault? We're gonna blame Trump for it, because that's what we do. Right? Alright, so, checks. So some of these checks on the presidency, right? The sort of stereotypical, the traditional ones, the ones that we understand, right, are the Congress and the courts. Okay, so Congress can check presidential power, the president vetoes something, Congress can override it. The courts can check presidential power, because obviously, as we've noticed, Trump on multiple occasions has tried to ban people from coming into this country, and on multiple occasions, the courts have said that's not acceptable. Alright? In terms of sort of new checks, and these are not, I won't use the term real, they're not real checks, right? It's more a matter of like public opinion type checks. Alright, so congressional leaders can check the power of the president. A lot of the times they'll use the media to do that by speaking out against presidential policies, okay, to try to sway the American people against the president. Cabinet members will check the president's power. Hopefully, theoretically, they should. If the president has a plan or an idea as it relates or as it pertains to an individual agency, hopefully the head of that agency would tell the president if it was a bad idea, right? So, like for instance, when President Trump refers to deportations as a military operation, which he did, hopefully General Kelly, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security, would be like, hey, this is not military. Shh, don't do that. Alright? And bureaucrats are basically the people underneath the cabinet, right? So this would be like James Comey. Do we know that name? Seriously, y'all don't know that name either? Add that to your list. I'm now going to call on two people tomorrow. One to tell me who Janet Yellen is, and the other to tell me who James Comey is. Okay? So I remember for tomorrow. Okay, here are some other things that can weaken sort of the power of the president. Alright, I should have taken that page number out. That's for the book I used in North Carolina. The use of independent counsel. Alright, that is a way of weakening the president. And we might find out this week because Comey is supposed to provide us with some information about this. If we have substantial evidence that says Trump colluded with the Russians, we might have an independent counsel. That would be somebody who's outside of the government who will come in and investigate to ensure that it is a nonpartisan investigation. Okay? If the president gets grossly out of control, we can impeach that president. That's a way to weaken them. In all honesty, if you impeach a president, even if you don't convict them, okay, it grossly weakens the power of the presidency because he really can't get anything done at that point, right? He has no more political capital. He looks like an illegitimate president because there was enough evidence to say that he committed some sort of high crime or misdemeanor, right? Now, what was Clinton's high crime and misdemeanor? What? Adultery is not a crime. Some of y'all gonna cheat on your significant other. You ain't gonna go to jail for it.
Y'all might go to the
What?
hospital for it.
Perjury. The man perjured himself, right? And as we've realized at this point, perjury not a crime, right? I hate to say that, but I mean, I guess if you're a politician, perjury is not a crime. The only person I can think of that perjured themselves and actually got in trouble for it is Barry Bonds. That's it. Right? And Barry Bonds just perjured himself saying he didn't do steroids. And you know what his crime was, or his punishment was? No. No. That's from his job. I'm I'm saying like the courts actually punished him.
Oh, no.
Did he go to jail?
Nope.
No. What did he get?
House arrest.
House arrest. The man lived in a mansion. Is that really a punishment? You want to put him on house arrest, make him live in my house. Right? I'll trade houses with him for like the 45 days or whatever he got. Terrible. Alright? The Senate can check the president's power by placing holds, or what we might see, if you paid attention at all, you know, or you should know, that confirmation hearings for Neil Gorsuch are starting today. I want to say actually like 10 a.m. And so what we may end up seeing is that the Senate may end up utilizing the filibuster in terms of that nomination. Right? Divided government weakens the power of the president. This is what happens. We've talked about this in the past when you have Congress of one branch, president of the other. All right? Oh, that's the idea of sort of a global check on the president because of the significance or the role of the UN, especially in American foreign policy. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute because we'll see that there's sort of a difference in how we treat a president based on his foreign agenda and his domestic agenda. Okay? If we have time, and I'm hoping we will, I'd like to come back and talk about some of these because theoretically, right, here's some ways that we, first of all, do we think we need to strengthen the presidency?
No.
Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Of all of these, this is the one that I always find the most interesting. Right? What you'll realize is if you actually go back and you look at sort of presidential history, presidents tend to get a significant amount accomplished in their first 100 days. We've talked about that phenomenon, right? Do we realize when they get what becomes the next most significant period of their presidency? And it's actually after they've been reelected. Because they then realize that they no longer have to play nice. Doesn't matter if everybody hates them, right? They have their office for another 3 or 4 years or whatever it is. So long as they don't commit a high crime or misdemeanor, you can't get rid of them. And when their time is up, it doesn't matter if you like them anymore or not, because guess what? They can't run again anyway. Okay? Alright, so when we look at the Congress versus the presidency, we know, because we've talked about this on multiple occasions, which of these two is the more dominant branch of government according to the Constitution? Congress. Absolutely. Who's more dominant today? President. Right? And that happens because over time Congress has allowed the president to become more powerful, and we've looked at the president to fix things in a wide variety of instances because the president can simply get things done quicker. It's easier for him to get things done in a more efficient manner because the executive branch doesn't require all of the parliamentary procedure that's required in Congress. All right? All right. Again, when we look at it, Congress is, and I think this is a part of the reason for Congress being a little less efficient, right? When you look at Congress, congressmen represent a very specific subset of the American population, and what that means is that the representative from Alaska does not necessarily want the exact same thing as the representative from California. And in fact, your liberal representatives in California would actually like to ban the burning of wood because it's a pollutant, right? You know how people in Alaska stay warm? They burn wood. Okay? They're not going to be okay with that. All right? The president, on the other hand, that is a national office. Okay? Forget who the president was that said it now, but But basically the realization is you can't be president of the United States and try to only be president for half the population. And I'm paraphrasing terribly, but the idea is the president has to cover everybody. Okay? With this, you can also see times of struggle between the Congress and the president when you have issues that might be national versus regional or local, right? In which case you can end up in situations where congressmen might want to take or claim that there's some sort of local interest that is predominant or prevailing, whereas the President of the United States is going to make it a national issue. And that makes it more difficult for either one of them to act in those times. All right? Partisanship is obviously conflict. We've talked about this in the idea of divided government. We remember that? Okay, so we know that the president tends to be of one party, and this is especially true once the sort of 30-some-odd year period of Democratic dominance ends, right? Basically in the late 60s. All right? As I'm sure you can notice today, even when Congress is of the same party as the President of the United States, there's always, or there's usually, I don't want to say always, there's usually going to be some intra-party conflict as well, right? So when you look at Trump care, and I don't really want to use that term because Donald Trump puts his name on everything. He will not put his name on that bid, right? Which probably tells you how terrible it is. But this is the repeal and replace of Obamacare that Republicans have worked so hard for, yet you have Republicans like Rand Paul who basically come out and said that they will not vote for this under any circumstance, no matter what. All right? So you have conflicts within the party that are fairly common. So even when you have, even when you do not have divided government, you can still have some struggles between the president and Congress. All right. Again, we've talked about this. So the president is one person, Congress is 335. Causes some conflict. You have. And it's funny that Ford spoke of presidential arrogance because he was a representative from Michigan. And thought that the office of the presidency was exerting power unfairly and was a little out of touch. And then Spiro Agnew resigned, and Nixon needed a new vice president, and so he appointed Ford. And then Nixon resigned, and all of a sudden Ford was president of the United States. And now instead of presidential arrogance, it's congressional irresponsibility. All right. Basically, both sides are going to blame one another, especially when things are not going well. All right, and even more so when you do have that period or that era of divided government. Right, it becomes real easy for a Democratic president to blame a Republican Congress or vice versa. All right. Now, this is what I sort of hinted at a minute ago when I told you that there's sort of this break between how we view the president in terms of his foreign policy and how we view the president in terms of his domestic policy. When we look at the executive branch, we understand, and I'm pretty sure we've talked about this constitutionally, we know that the executive branch has to take the lead in foreign policy issues, right? We've talked about this. So when you have countries like Syria that are in the midst of a civil war, right? Who is the actual ruler? Who is the leader of Syria? Is it Assad or is it the rebels? Well, it depends on who you ask, right? Because some people would say that Assad is not legitimate because Assad has used nuclear or I think it was chemical weapons against his own people, and he's a ruthless dictator, and that the rebels are ultimately a group waging a war for their own freedom. Okay? One of the reasons that we have to have a presidency rather than a 535 member Congress that determines which leadership is legitimate, is because one person needs to make that call, right? One person needs to be the individual who determines whether or not the leader of Palestine is an actual foreign dignitary, or if he's somewhat less than a foreign dignitary, right? And if you don't know what I mean when I say that, that's the question as to whether or not Palestine is its own independent nation, all right? The domestic aspect of it, though, is different, and typically where Congress is supposed to be the predominant or the leading entity, right? Because we know that all economic decisions come from where?
Congress,
More specifically,
House
the
Representatives.
House of Representatives, right? Okay, the House of Representatives is responsible for spending money, raising money, all that stuff. Okay? And so when it comes to domestic policies, the President of the United States is, or Congress is less willing to give in to what the President wants there. All right? When we talk about how the President can try to influence Congress, obviously media is one of them. We've talked about this concept before when we talked about media. The President of the United States can speak to the media far easier than what various congressional leaders can, and congressional leaders will sometimes deliver different messages. All right, the president can talk to the people, try to get the people on board. People then call their congressman and say, "Hey, here's what we want." All right. There's the mandate after winning the election. We talked about this with the election process. Okay, this is why Trump came out and made outlandish claims of having the largest victory in the Electoral College since 1980 or 84, whatever year he wrongly claimed. I don't know. And patronage, that's the idea of giving jobs. It does help with his influence over Congress because the president can appoint people to cabinet positions that used to be in Congress. All right. The chief of the party role, we talked about this with the roles of the president just before spring break. We said that this was an informal role, a non-constitutional role. But because the president of the United States is the head of his party, theoretically he should be able to get people in his party to do what he wants. So when you see or when you've heard reports that say that there are 22 hard no's on the American Health Care Act or American Health Care Reform Act, whatever they're calling it, the president actually came out and spoke to people in Congress and said that of the 22 no's, they're all yeses now. He's trying to get or to reinsure Republicans that they're going to get what they want accomplished. All right. So lobbying members of Congress and basically just trying to influence them. That's what lobbying is, right? And some of the little tactics there can be campaigning for somebody to help them get reelected or things like that. The president can also influence Congress by either vetoing or even threatening to veto something, right? The vast majority of vetoes cannot be overridden, all right? What we end up with here is the president ultimately being in charge and the president being responsible for everything, all right? I do need you to understand, though, that there are times where Congress will try to walk that back, and I think we'll get into it tomorrow with the War Powers Act. All right. What we have, though, is this idea, and this is sort of a counter ideology in terms of how you think about the presidency. So it's based on a book called The Imperial Presidency, which basically says that the President of the United States is now operating in a manner that's sort of outside of what is allowed constitutionally, and it's a result of some of the basic necessities of how we need to get things accomplished. Okay? No, we will get into war powers today. All right? One of those, or one of the ways that it really happens is because of this aspect of foreign policy, and because the president is the sort of the head of foreign policy in the United States, he's responsible for all of this, and so this is where that sort of idea of imperialism comes in. And one of the ways that this happens is with war powers, or is with specifically with the military. And so we talked about one of those roles is commander-in-chief, right? What does that mean? Will?
The military?
Yeah, what does it mean? So as commander-in-chief, what does he do? Controls the military, right? So he can move the military anywhere he wants, right? And over time, we have seen presidents abuse this, okay? So what you see is that presidents have sent troops without any sort of declaration of war, without any official congressional approval, over 100 times since World War II, right? Because before the break, I posed that question to you. When is the last time we declared or when was the last time we declared war? Right? And the answer is World War II. We have not declared war since 1941. Yet, name a war that we have been in since World War II. Vietnam, Korea, Iraq. Keep going back there. Right? I don't know which the correct way to pronounce it is.
Iraq. It's Iraq.
Iraq? I've heard it pronounced like 7 ways while I was in the Marine Corps. Yeah. And I feel like we've been there 7 times. But obviously the president, as part of this, and this is the imperial aspect, is we can sort of promote American ideologies throughout the country. Okay? And Congress has been complicit in this. We talked about this before. Congress funds it. Theoretically, if at any point in time Congress wanted to stop the president from doing that, all Congress has to do is defund it. Stop giving the money. Okay? Let me tell you right now, I loved my time in the Marine Corps. I'm proud of having been a Marine. I'm going to tell you right now, if you stop paying me, you better not start shooting at me. Because I'm leaving. Right? I'm not going to get shot at for free. Alright? No matter how much I was proud of my job, I'm not doing it for free. Just like I'm not doing this job for free. Okay? Now, obviously not a job I was ever going to get rich doing. Okay? But that's okay. Because I'm proud of both of them. But you at least got to pay me enough to where I can afford to eat. You don't get this big without it. Alright? So Congress has been very complicit in this. And a part of the reason that Congress is because if you're a congressman and you vote to defund the military because you don't like where the president has sent them, what's the message there? How do they spend that? What? You don't support the troops. Right? Oh, you don't support the troops because you wouldn't give the troops their money. It's not about supporting the troops. Alright? Which is how sort of Congress sort of gets railroaded into this no matter what. Alright? The president will sort of declare emergency powers. And so I talked about this a second ago, like during the Civil War, Lincoln suspends habeas corpus, and the censorship of mail, yes, that's actually real. Okay, when you're in a foreign country, right? And yes, I still had to send mail home. I would assume that the people over there now can send emails home, but I don't know that for a fact. But you actually were not allowed to seal your mail. It had to be read before it could be sealed and sent home. Just to make sure that you weren't divulging any sort of information that you're not supposed to be divulging. Okay? In fact, there have been instances in which the press has been censored in times of war as well as a part of emergency powers. Okay? I forget who the correspondent was, but and I forget, I want to say he was in Iraq, but he basically like had the camera point to the sand and like drew a map in the sand and showed like where they were on pretty much live television, which is about the dumbest thing in the world, because you think the enemy ain't got cable? Come on. And the president will also use executive agreements rather than treaties. Understand the difference here, okay? So, treaties require ratification, executive agreements do not. Alright? Executive privilege, this is one of these abuses. This is what I was talking about earlier when I said executive powers. This is what Nixon and Clinton both tried to claim. On the bright side, the Supreme Court has shot that down a little bit, saying that you can't use it to get out of some sort of criminal investigation or case. Okay? Impoundment, this is an idea with the imperial presidency that is now actually no longer allowed. But basically what this is we understand Congress is the one that passes the budget, right? Yes? I know I'm going long today, but you gotta bear with me. I ain't got much longer. Okay? Congress passes the budget. That money then goes to executive branches, right? To the bureaucracy. If the president doesn't like it, what can the president do? This is where the presidency came up with this idea of impounding funds. So basically, Congress says we're going to pay X number of dollars to this. The president doesn't like it. He just takes the money and sits on it. Doesn't do anything with it. Okay? Which is what impoundment is. All right? Which is not okay. The veto, we've talked about, obviously vetoes don't get overridden. So there you go. That should give you a little bit of an idea, and I realize that that was intense and sort of long. Okay? Obviously, you have access to this online. I would advise you to go back and look at it again, because this really is sort of the meat of what the presidency is. All right? This is the powers of the executive branch, as well as sort of the abuses of those powers as well. All right?